Welcome to Video Learning Lab, where we talk about learning and development and also what you can do to make your video content better. Today, I'm quite interested and excited because this is the first time that we have two guests on. We're joined today by Egle and Myles. Egle and Myles, welcome. Great to have you. If you could start off just by introducing yourselves and letting our listeners know a little bit about what you're about. We'll start off with you, Egle.
Hello. My name is Egle Vinauskaite. I'm director of Nodes, which is a learning innovation agency. And right now, as far as it relates to product and why I'm here, I work with two types of clients. The first one, they're startups bringing their edtech products to market. So I work on advising them on the learning aspect of these products. And the other type of clients that I work with, they're large organizations creating or scaling their learning offerings, often digitally enabled. So yeah, these worlds collide in interesting ways, and I hope to be able to talk about it today.
Yeah, hi, Myles Runham. So I work as a digital learning consultant to various different organizations on the client side, mostly corporate, but not only corporate learning organizations, and also like with vendors and learning service providers as well, mostly on digital strategy, technology, design, those kinds of themes. So similar to Egle, but perhaps less on the innovation side. I don't know, we'll see, but that's my guess, we'll see.
I was talking to Egle a little while ago about how the two of you met, because I know that even though you're working in parallel, you have known each other for quite some time. I'm just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how the two of you met.
I'll start, yeah. So I think it was probably April of 2020. I think it was April. And so this was in the first throes of COVID. So I was, I think, sharing the sentiment of fear and panic, thinking that the sky was going to fall in on me, my family, my health, my business, and so was sat at home kind of rocking in anxiety at that thought. And I thought, well, I can't be the only one who's thinking this. And doom scrolling through social media. And I thought on LinkedIn, I just put out a post to people like, look, does anybody out there want to just talk this through? How you're feeling? What's going on? Really, it was just a sort of, I suppose, a sort of gentle communal cry for help, saying, let's have a conversation. And quite a few people said, yeah, I'm up for that. I found fellow warriors out there, and Egle was one of the people who joined that first conversation. I think it was April 2020. That's my guess.
Yeah. I remember back then I hadn't seen another person for 2 weeks, so that must have been like 2 weeks into lockdown. And I remember, like you said, that you were just rocking in anxiety. I think there were many of us rockers back in the day. So yeah, that's how we met in quite a sort of a vulnerable environment at a very disturbing time of our lives. So we've known each other since.
And just like that, we've brought a new meaning to the word rockers. So already innovation is coming out of this conversation in a way that I'm very excited about.
That's
so exactly. And networking is really important just for learning folks in general, spreading best practices, finding folks who can inspire us and help drive the field forward. So I'm really feeling fortunate to have both of you on here. I think, both of you just talked a little bit about your perspective and your expertise and kind of where you're coming from. I'm wondering if you could just start us off by giving us a look at the learning landscape and look at where we currently are. I know that we're doing a little bit of soul searching in L&D. Since we alluded to back in the pandemic, learning was thinking about how we design and deliver training over remote. And now we're kind of caught shifting 2 to 3 years forward. We're caught up in this next big tech shift with generative AI. And I'm in this kind of in-between space where we're trying to really figure out what our role is about. Can you tell what's your slice of that learning world looking like right now? And we'll start with you, Myles.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like a very sort of weighty warm-up question. So I think I'll try and break it down. I think when you asked, what's working well, I think, perhaps unhelpfully, what's working well are the things that always work well. So for me, that's in a sort of clarity of purpose, identifying important problems to solve, focusing on practical value and outcomes. I think one of the things I think that works really well, and perhaps works best when circumstances feel uncertain is, testing, start small, build, measure, learn, and work from there. I think that works well for maybe, applying some of these potentially exciting and terrifying new technologies, but also just helps you understand what's useful, what's most useful, but also what you're capable of and what you and your organization can do. So I think, under any circumstances, those are some of the things I would fall back on. I think in terms of the sort of learning technology landscape, I find myself swinging from excitement to fear quite quickly at the moment. Actually, I think a lot of this is in response to, to our collective response to ChatGPT, but those kind of tools specifically. And I keep thinking, this is amazing. We're going to be able to do so much, and then also this is terrifying. I worry most about an ocean of mediocrity coming from those tools, but maybe that's something that we'll come back to.
For sure. And I think what you say, an ocean of mediocrity, I think generative AI tools allow us to build things with less effort more easily, but that just kind of adds to all the content that's already out there and more people will be producing it. So I think I'm also choosing to highlight, doing what every organization has the capacity to do. You should really focus on what you're doing well at the moment before you start trying to innovate in things we don't quite yet understand. Egle, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, what you're seeing.
Well, I largely agree with Myles, but I'm not going to go into commenting on generative AI because I think that could be a different and separate conversation in and of itself. But at this very high level, once the dust has settled, I don't think that much has changed. We are still, so obviously we're seeing new technologies which are offering to do something better, something more effectively. By something I mean learning. But the same questions still remain. What are we using them for? What are we trying to achieve? And the sort of thinking about how do we put them together into a holistic solution rather than saying that, okay, if I deploy this technology, if I give my learners, users, employees access to this technology, is going to solve my engagement problem, my learning problem, skill and performance, whatever. These conversations we've been having for as long as I have been in this industry, and we're still here.
Is there anything particular that you have been focused on recently with your clients, or trends that you've seen that particularly across the learning landscape?
Again, right now as we're speaking, which is end of March, because I'm sure that this is not going to age well when it comes to generative AI. One thing aside from that, where everyone is trying to figure out how generative AI might fit into their workflows, into their deliverables, into their output in the learning industry particularly. Aside from that, I'm seeing a huge, if not push, then there is, I'd probably call it demand for collaboration, human, like exchange of human knowledge, that sort of social learning, not necessarily sometimes face-to-face, but a lot of the times even how do we create these spaces digitally so that we can scale this, so that we can be more inclusive. And so I would say that communities are, like, right now, from my vantage point, they're seeming to be quite a big thing. And one thing that I'm wondering right now, whether once that ChatGPT, not just ChatGPT, but generative AI produced contents, one, because it's so cheap, whether this is what people are going to be craving. So as Myles is saying, we can end up in a sea of mediocrity, and like we may not, but we'll see about that. But on the other end of a sea of mediocre digital content is meaningful connection with people.
I'm curious. We both of you definitely talked about the sea of mediocrity. I guess what is what is one of the reasons that we're going to see such an up jump in this content that maybe is not as useful, or what's going to lead to all of this poorly designed content being made?
I suppose I'm not predicting this sea of mediocrity. I think for me it's what I'm most anxious about in a learning context anyway. There's plenty of other things to be exercised about, but I think in a learning context, what worries me is I guess the content that, the input content, the content as training data for these systems, if the content was really interesting, high quality, universally, then I think this is really cool. Then the content that's going to come back at you, very simply put, could be then very interesting. But I worry that a lot of e-learning content, or classical e-learning content, and online learning content hasn't been at that high level. Not all of it. This is a generalization. So that's the concern for me. And then these tools will use that as their input. So what they respond with will then draw from that. And I worry that there's not going to be, it'll be harder to get something kind of new, different, interesting and useful from that base. I think that's what I sort of, when I frown about these things, that's what I worry about, I think.
Yeah, I would probably summarize my concern in that once it's easy to create content with AI, then it's very tempting and very easy to outsource all content to AI. Right now, probably every week, I'm seeing webinar after webinar of vendors talking about how, well, we had this tool, we had an LMS authoring tool, whatever, and now you can use it, but you're just not going to have to do anything. Just generate whatever content you need. And if you outsource content like that without actual human input, and this kind of takes us back to the product question and product mindset is if it's just about content, if it's being content led, then where are we gonna end up? Because right now there is so much content already, even without AI, so much low quality content sitting in libraries that people are not engaging with, and that's not helpful in any way for them. So yeah, that's my concern.
Yeah, and since you've taken us there, I know that one thing that really kind of led me to both of your work is this idea of bringing a product management mindset or product management skills to the learning world. And Myles, I know most recently you posted about still howling about product management. And so for our learning audience, for those who are not as well versed in what that might mean, could you kind of sum that up for us? What is product management, and maybe how does it tie into learning and development?
I guess I see product management as I suppose as an approach, as trying to identify product value from the tools or the resources that you're using, and that can be technology, it could be content, it could be people, conversation, as Egle was saying, and using three forms of insight from that. So what I would say is a good product manager has a great technology understanding and bring technology insight to those, to solving those valuable problems. They have a good audience or user insight, so they have some of that sense of what's interesting and useful for people. And they have a good business insight as well, so they know your business or your organization, what's most valuable, what are the important problems to solve. So it's really kind of triangulating those three sources of insight into product value. And then there's all sorts of other behaviors and tools and techniques to create that product value. But that's what I see. For me, that's why product management's important. And I guess the reason that I still howl about it is that I still worry that there's digital learning folks are not as well versed in that, and organizations aren't applying it as much as they could. I guess that's why I started howling in that blog post anyway. It was a personal cry of frustration from 10 years of observation, really.
I think that those skills that you mentioned of being data aware, having a tech, awareness of the technology and what those solutions can do. I think those skills in and of themselves are not particularly new for what a learning designer should be considering, or what L&D folks should be considering. I guess what's different about a product manager's approach to data or those tools that's different from what you're seeing done now?
So I think one of the things that I've seen is that for learning folks tend to think about learning as the product. And I think learning isn't a product. Learning isn't something that you can make or produce. Learning is the outcome. So I think the point is really to use those tools in a product context to, tools for learning, I suppose, is what tools or products for learning is what I think we should focus on, rather than just the application of technology to surface content, or the application of technology to, produce access to assigned learning. I think that's where I see the opportunity is to you bring that sensibility of problem solving to those tools and content, rather than the management of platforms and the management of content on those platforms.
Yeah, so first I would probably, when it comes to learning, rather than using the term product management, I prefer the term product mindset, because for me, product management is a very specific process. It's a very specific role that someone, meaning the product manager, performs. And usually, or at least often, it's used in contexts that are solving problems perhaps in a more technically complex, sophisticated way. So I'm sort of using the looser definition of what we're talking about, which is, in my mind, product mindset. And a product mindset, as Myles has said, it's about it's an approach to solving problems, and what it entails is this obsessive focus on your end user, on who they are, what they need, what problem you're solving for them, and what that solution would be, and how are you going to create actual value for them. And we can talk about why product management is so important in L&D, and why it would be different before we go into the skills, because again, the skills, like it's a bit of a combination of skills, mindsets, ways of working, processes. So it's I think it's a very complex question. Yes. Yeah. So I guess it's quite useful to give you some context about how that product mindset, how not just mindset in general, differs between, say, a corporate learning department and an edtech startup. Because when you're creating something, a learning solution, program, whatever, in your L&D department, the stakes are relatively low. If people do not engage, if the solution falls flat, yes, there is money lost. Yes, there is time that people lose, the opportunity cost of them pretty much wasting their time because they have been mandated to go for that program or course or whatever. But other than that, it's not a catastrophe. But when you're thinking about, so in the context of building a business, when you're building a startup that is around an educational product, the stakes, they could not be higher. Everything is at stake, because if you fail, if you create something that people do not use and do not pay for, then you will run out of runway. If you don't have a product market fit, you don't have a business. So what's at stake is your job, your income, your life's dreams, your colleagues' income, and ultimately your sanity. So it's a very different environment, and I think this is one of the reasons that the mindset is different when you're in that kind of environment, because the focus is very much on survival and creating exactly what your end users need. So keeping your finger on the pulse at all times. It's really interesting to work in such environments, and you get a lot of insights that you do not get in corporate environments. So this is just to frame one of the mindset bits that is pretty much the incentives. One thing that product managers are especially good at is stakeholder management, because it's one of these cursed professions where you are almost in charge of everything, but you don't have any direct reports. You don't have any real power in the hierarchy. And if you think about the process about product of product development and sort of product management frameworks, they are very much about creating clarity and buy-in of all stakeholders within the team, across the business. And so definitely this is something that is related. And this is, I guess, yeah, if you think about it, when it comes to product, it's not about sort of adopting a specific process for the sake of it. It is, first of all, adopting a process so that you get deep knowledge of your end user. And then once you gather that, the next step is your internal communication, so that you can deliver and execute.
I think one of the things I think that's
Sure.
really helpful in that product mindset, to what Egle was saying, is that being clear about the problem you're going to solve or the value you're going to bring with that product is usually quite closely associated with being able to measure that benefit as well. So it's usually, like your product isn't there to make people feel good or to learn stuff. It's there to, to have a specific outcome, and part of the design of the product is that is that you can gather the data as the product is used on, that tells you whether you're getting closer or not to meeting that goal. I think that for me, those are two of the most important elements of the kind of product mindset that I think could be really powerful in a learning context as well.
And so again, I think you alluded to this at the beginning of our conversation, where it's doing more of the same. Or what we know what works, or what our role as folks in L&D, what we're supposed to be tackling, especially from a data perspective. What are some of the obstacles for L&D adopting kind of these mindsets? I guess, why is our industry in this position?
A few thoughts on that is, well, first of all, as product mindset is by definition a different way of thinking and working. And in very practical ways, that means a few things. So first of all, there is an upfront cost for discovery, which you have to become comfortable with. And even once you invest the time and money, there is no, quote unquote, tangible deliverable there at the end of it. Their clarity is the deliverable. So that's the first. Then it perhaps requires different skills than what you currently have. Managing the process requires different skills than what you normally have in L&D, or perhaps it's a question of whether L&D knows how to hire for such skills, potentially. And I guess the last thing that comes to mind, again, as part of this process, is that it requires a degree of comfort with ambiguity, meaning that you may not know what the end product, what the deliverable is going to be, and there is no real end to it. There is no deliver and forget. There is end of a cycle. You release this product into the wild, and you track the metrics. You speak to users. You collect feedback, and you iterate and iterate and iterate. So that shift-up mindset is a much more complex process than just creating something that's very tangible and has a very clear start and an end. So I think because of these reasons, it's not a very natural thing to choose as your way of working and as your approach in a big organization, I would say.
Yeah, I think one of the things that L&D struggles with in this sort of transition to digital is the notion of user choice as well. Is that L&D has come, particularly learning technologies with a capital L and a capital T. VLMS was built on the idea of assigning learning to someone who is then going to do that learning, whatever it looks like. And then meanwhile the world is racing ahead to this sort of all-powerful user, with many thousands of apps and options at our fingertips, and now attention and time is hard to come by. To your point earlier, Kevin, about marketing, I think that's a real challenge as well, sort of flipping from this sense of assigning something to someone who is then going to do it, and by do it we mean finish it or sit down and watch it and be part of it, to a place where we have to compete, with someone drifting off to respond to a notification on their phone at any given moment, and then and the analysis and the data that supports the people who are fighting for that attention on the phone. I think that's a kind of tough spot for learning technology managers to be in. It's a big transition, I think, but that's one of the challenges to adopting these ways of working, I think.
What you've both shared is, in addition to the urgency, part of this product mindset when it comes to learning and development is being able to put a price on the different stages of developing a particular piece of learning or developing a solution to a particular problem. Where you talk about the price of discovery, that's I know we think about the who's funding our projects, and we think about how stakeholders view the value of a learning intervention or developing a particular solution, we talk about that. But you're talking more about the individual, almost like what is the value of each stage of the process? What is it going to take to deliver on a good discovery? What is it going to take to deliver on good development? And so I think that's already one way that we're trying to parse apart this product mindset in learning and development. And then to what you mentioned, Myles, as well, is that idea of user choice and the fact that we can't really think about our audience as a captive audience anymore. It's, we're competing with everything else that's out there. And so we have to think about how we design these solutions to compete with everything else that's competing for our learners' attention. But back to that question, Egle, I guess, what's the reason why now? Why is it important for learning folks to develop that product or shift towards this product mindset of thinking?
So in short, the product mindset is important in L&D because it reduces waste and it creates value. But that's quite big, so let me elaborate on that. L&D has an engagement problem. Not all L&D departments, not in all companies, but it is a problem that a lot of people rank quite high up in any survey in our industry. And in my opinion, that problem comes from largely two places. First, from a real lack of relevance of the L&D offering, or from the perceived lack of relevance of the L&D offering, which is a comms problem, which I'm not going to get into right now. But relevance is where it's at. And creating solutions that people find irrelevant, it does three things. First, it obviously wastes money that you invest into creating and producing that solution. Second, it wastes time of the people who are actually spending their time to do that course or program or whatever, and that can be converted readily into a monetary loss. But most importantly, it's a waste of opportunity to actually make a difference. To make a difference in someone's work, in someone's career, in someone's life by extension. And one thing that I feel that we don't appreciate enough in this industry is that we are quite lucky to have chosen an industry where we actually can help people self-actualize, reach their goals, or even financial goals, which affects their lifestyle, affects how they can take care of their family, how they can play any roles that all of us have in our lives that are important to us. And each learning that doesn't make a difference, each learning solution that doesn't make a difference could have been a solution that does make a difference and gets people closer to their goals. And that's where the product mindset comes in. That if you start with how to make things relevant for that person, you inevitably have to explore what that person is, what that person needs, who that person is, and how to best solve the problem in a way that brings value to them. And that's how you reduce waste of money, time, and ultimately human capital.
I guess I go back slightly to my answer when I arrived in L&D about 10 years ago from a product management environment, both in sort of learning products, the educational content products, and then also from prior to that in search engine industry. And I kind of arrived in L&D and I just thought, well, why aren't people doing product management? Every other walk of life and sector has been transformed by digital because they're applying product management, product mindset, as Egle was describing, to those problems. They might be, problems, in retail or could be anything. And I find, so for me, I think if there is a problem with learning, feeling it's special and different, we need to get over that and say no, that framing the problems in the right way, which is for the learner, whoever they may be, to offer them something relevant for me, which is interesting and useful in a context that satisfies that source of funding. It feels like here is a way of working in the digital world that seems to work well for every industry, and I can't see why L&D would be different. So let's do it. that was where I started sort of 10 years ago in that line of thought. And I think now, the further on I get, just think it becomes more clear that we can and could and should work in those ways.
Both of you touch upon this idea of framing either finding the right problem, and then Myles, you just talked about framing the problem correctly. I guess what can we do differently, or what's that shift that needs to happen? Is it that we're not framing our problems correctly when we're bringing them back to the business? Is it that we're not identifying the right problems? What do you both see as the change that needs to happen in the way that we talk about business problems in L&D?
I think one of the things that I think is an opportunity, and I've seen really good product managers do this in learning and elsewhere, or the application of that product mindset, if they're not actually product managers, is from a business perspective, you get a sort of sense of that here's what we need you to do, or here's the problem we want you to solve. I think bringing user or audience insight back to the business is really, really helpful. So here's what that problem looks like from the ground up. Here's what it looks like, in the sales force, or here's what it looks like on the factory floor, etc. So you can try to bring some of that user insight and experience to life for business stakeholders is a really, really valuable facet of product management behavior. And I think conversely, framing a business challenge or a business need, a business problem for the audience and the end users is equally important as well. So I think it's just really hard to do. It's not like these people are falling from growing on trees, but the ability to kind of translate and transcribe business need to audience and audience context to business stakeholders is a really, really valuable part of the equation.
One thing that I hear you talking about is, as far as the way that we talk, when we bring data to the conversation, or when we bring data into how we frame the business problem, it's choosing I guess maybe it's the scope, or the scope into your context. Like you said, is the problem, depending on the stakeholder, is the problem being viewed from Salesforce? Is it being viewed from the manufacturing plant floor? And using that, because we have using that to frame your observation, your insights, and the data you're bringing to the problem. Because I think one of the things that I know that I've seen folks struggle with is, we have so much data to bring to the table, whether that's interviews with particular stakeholders, or that's the data you're bringing in from Salesforce, or that's maybe you're seeing something, you're seeing behaviors and actions across the company. You're observing those, and you're trying to bring all of those all together and make a case that maybe isn't landing with the particular stakeholder that you're talking to. Is that kind of what you're thinking about, Myles, when you're talking about bringing data to the conversation?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I suppose what you've referred to there, Kevin, is probably one of the challenges we maybe have with data is we tend to think of it being sort of digital data or quantitative. But I think you're right. You've described other kinds of evidence, maybe that are really, really helpful to provide that context and direction. I think that is crucial. I remember when I was at the BBC, I worked with one product manager who was kind of famously difficult but very successful, and that person wouldn't he wouldn't do anything on his roadmap without some form of evidence or data. He said that's not getting on my backlog. We're not prioritizing that unless we've got some evidence that this is a product improvement or a new feature that has value. And one of the interesting things that they would do then is say, well, let's go and find some data. If we haven't got it, let's experiment. So we'll do like maybe a paper prototype, or an A/B test, or whatever it might be, to create the data that helps you to take the decision. I think that for me was a really useful lesson, and I think it's something that we really struggle with in learning. Often that sort of order taker metaphor where no one really knows if this is a good idea or not, but someone shouts loudest, and you go and make a program and don't really know how to measure it, etc. I think that sense of experimenting to create data that helps you take a decision is for me, that was a really useful idea that I hadn't come across before.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing here would be that it's not just about quantitative data. It's also about qualitative data, getting the context from everyone involved. So that's the first. And another point I wanted to make about data is that it's not just data. There's also this intuition that you have. And in my slice of the learning world, when you're creating something that there is no real roadmap for, that there is no real sort of best practice on how to do it. For example, if it's a completely new technology or a completely new use of that technology, having that intuition, and obviously supported by data, supported by insights, evidence, and so on, but having that intuition about what might be, so if we need to make a leap, if we need to make a sort of a decision that we can test before we can gather any data, that intuition is very important before you even get to the data gathering. And in my world, obviously there is data. I think when you are starting a business, when you're spinning up a product, you're collecting as many data points as you possibly can. The bigger question is what questions you ask, because it's not just about having a data pool. It's about actually knowing what you're trying to get out of it, much like you would be preparing for an interview with a user, instead of just letting them speak about their just with free form. So that's one of the big things, actually. Structuring the vision, the thinking, whatever everyone around the table is trying to create, into the questions we need to answer before we can get conviction in the decision that we can quickly build, that we can deploy, test, and see what happens.
Just making sure that we have some good takeaways for folks. I know that there's some folks who are listening who, they might be wanting to start to adopt this, be more like a product manager in their work, who are in the L&D field. I'm curious, from both of you, and, we'll start with you, Myles. What are some of the steps that they can take?
I suppose, there's a not wanting to be kind of reductive, but I think the idea of build, measure, learn is now tried and tested. And build can mean many different things. That can be, prototype, it can be experiment. But I think one of the things that I really like and have always enjoyed about working with a product management mindset, whether it's with a product manager or not, is that these folks tend to want to go and do something, want to get something done, make a difference, make an impact. So I think that for me, build, measure, learn is the thing to, but almost a really good start point. One of the things I think that's really interesting about that is, the last word is learn, and for us in the learning industry, that I've found as a sort of like a source of irony, but I don't mean this to be critical, is that digital organizations, product organizations are learning organizations, because they try stuff and they figure it out, they fail, and they improve and they learn as they go. And I think there's something kind of neat and tidy about the idea of build, measure, learn for L&D, really, which I think we should embrace, and I think a lot of people do, really, but they might not call it that.
There's a bit in there about experimentation playing a huge role in what you're discussing, where it's rather than plow headfirst into a big intervention, maybe it's better to run, based off the data, a small test and get one thing right, as opposed to trying to figure out what is going to be the big solution that tackles three different problems. Let's solve this, see what steps we can take to solve it first.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it's difficult because I think, the L&D traditionally has been project and program focused, where you gather all your requirements, you lay out your plan carefully, and you say, here's the next 6 months and here's when we finish. So this is slightly, it does require you to abandon that reflex a little bit, but I think it's just sort of, it's very practical and pragmatic, I think, as well, which is attractive to me.
And Egle, is there what are some of the skills that you think folks need to either start researching more about, or maybe one step that they can practice, they can start in their practice starting tomorrow?
I'm going to give you exactly one step, which is speak with your end users and be genuinely curious about them, and don't be satisfied with getting only secondhand accounts. For example, their line managers telling you what the reports need, which is a great data point. It's great for context, but it cannot be your only source of information about your end users. And the reason I'm saying this is that you will be surprised by what you hear and what you uncover, even from very short conversations. I remember at one time I was working on a program with senior managers, and it was really, really difficult to get time in their calendar to ask them about anything. And what I said is that, can I get 15 minutes from 5 people? Literally, I can join them for a sandwich over the lunch break. Just give me 15 minutes. I'm going to ask them 3 questions. And that was enough for me to gain really valuable insights into that actually influence the product quite a lot. And the thing is, the reason why it's the only like the first step that I'm suggesting people do, and pretty much like start with that, is that once you know what problems your people are facing, once you know that, you cannot unknow it, and the rest kind of solves itself.
I have so many more questions for both of you, but it's been so wonderful to pick your brains, and we got some really juicy tidbits that we'll be shouting out in the show notes as well. And if you want to hear more from Myles and Egle, we'll be linking both the blog and Egle's work as well in the show notes. So be sure to reach out to them. And I realize I just offered both of your time up to our listeners, but I hope you don't mind. But otherwise, it's been a pleasure to speak with you both, and thank you both for coming on. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thanks, Kevin.